So, Dave, we're firmly ensconced in the Attitude Era at this point. That has become, of course, the phrase to refer to this late 90s boom period on the back of Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Mick Foley, and others. To you, Dave, what does the term Attitude Era mean?
Oh, it was the hottest period of wrestling in my life. That's for sure. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that they, I always look at it. You had Austin and Rock, and you had a lot of other people too that came along. You really had a great roster of talent at the time, and they were edgy and um, they clicked with society. But wrestling was super hot. I mean, WCW had already made wrestling hot, and they were the spotlight was there, and then WCW was self-destructing while Austin and Vince were coming up, and that I think was as much as anything. I think it was as much the big R's as much as the attitude was part of it, and Austin was the attitude of Austin and the trash talk of The Rock and all that were part of it. But I think it was as much those larger than life, incredible personalities. Because I think in my lifetime, when I look at the guys, the real big movers, I feel that was probably the territories. A lot of the territories had guys. So maybe Bruno Sammartino in the 70s was certainly a huge mover, and then in the early 80s on a regional basis in the Carolinas you had Ric Flair, who was he was such a cultural icon to this day in that part of the country, and then you had Hulk Hogan in Minneapolis who took it to WWF and became even bigger. So you had Hulk Hogan, and then you had Austin and The Rock, and I think that it ends there. That's the end. I mean, perhaps there were guys before, Jim Londos or Buddy Rogers. I mean, I look at the attendance figures, and I'm sure they must have been really hot for their era. But in my lifetime, it's that. And they had Austin and they had Rock, and they had them at the same time, and nobody ever had two of them at the same time. And I think that was a big, big part of the deal.
Of course, the main event of WrestleMania 15 is Stone Cold Steve Austin versus The Rock for the WWF Championship. And Dave, when we first meet The Rock on the WrestleMania stage, it's WrestleMania 13. He's Rocky Maivia. He's hated. He's going in the wrong direction, to say the very least. And 2 years later, he is a bona fide megastar, more than capable of holding his own in the ring with the hottest star in the business on the grand stage. How does The Rock emerge as the man and the main foil such that he could hang with Stone Cold after he had such a depressing and just horrible debut?
He figured out how to talk. I mean, he probably already knew, but he wasn't doing it. His original role wasn't the right role, and he came up with this idea, and I'm sure others helped him, but he got this idea of a character, and he could talk the talk. I mean, I remember when it was the Nation of Domination era where they put him in, and he started talking. The first time he talked, it was almost like the first time I remember the first time I heard Edge talk, and I'm not trying to say Edge is the level of The Rock because he's not, but it was almost like, wow, this guy can really talk. He could be somebody. And with Rock, it was the same thing. I think Kurt Angle to a degree too. But with Rock, it was more. It was just like the first time he started talking, shut your mouth, Farouk, and all that, and they started building that tension there. It was just like, oh my God. And I remember he was working with Shamrock. And I remember Shamrock, who at the time when Rock and Shamrock were doing their program, the idea was, that Rock was the heel to get Shamrock over, I think. And Shamrock was the bigger star at first. And I remember, and all of a sudden it was like, boy, Rock's becoming a bigger star than Shamrock. And it was funny because I halfway was feeling it, but it was Shamrock actually told me. I remember it was in a conversation I had with him, and he just goes, this guy's going to be the next Bruno Sammartino, which I thought was funny because I didn't even know that Ken Shamrock knew who Bruno Sammartino was. And you would think he would say Hulk Hogan because Bruno was before his time, but that's what he said. He goes, this guy's going to be the next Bruno Sammartino in the middle of that feud when the guy was a heel at the time. So it was just like, and that's when it really clicked. It's like, yeah, this guy, he's going to be just under Steve Austin is what I always thought. I don't think he was ever going to be as big as Steve Austin. And it ended, in culture, he ended up being bigger, but that was my thought. He's going to be just under Steve Austin. And by the time they got to this Mania, I didn't recognize how big he was because he was working with Foley, and I saw him and Foley at like the same level, but they chose him because, he was better looking. And Foley was such a fantastic promo. I thought that it was, it was nip and tuck. They were at the same level. But when that buy rate came in for that WrestleMania, it was just like they did the same number without Tyson that Tyson did. So it's just like, they really had, it was like that did so much better than anybody thought. Everybody thought without Tyson they'd go back, not back because it was a more popular thing, but they would never do the kind of number Tyson did, and they did. So it was like that was the real sign that it was like you got, that's an incredible match.
And this is the first WrestleMania where we see the heel Vince McMahon character. Of course, November 97 is the Montreal Screwjob, and they sort of leveraged that to introduce the character, but Vince as a heel didn't really break through or become the mainstay of television as he was until really the night after WrestleMania 14 when Austin comes out, gets the belt, with the new belt and everything, and the new era begins and he stuns Vince. Now, we see Vince on the WrestleMania stage as heel Vince for the first time here, and he's such a vital part of all this. Your thoughts, Dave, on why the Vince McMahon heel character worked so well? And more than that, did you see this coming? Did you always know that Vince could be an absolute home run heel, or did he surprise you?
Well, I saw that the stuff in Memphis was in '93-ish. So and look, Vince is a great performer. You know what I mean? I don't think there was. As a television announcer, I never thought of Vince McMahon as a great television announcer, but I thought he was a great performer as a television announcer when he would stand there and interview the baby faces and the heels and he'd make those faces. I always thought that he added so much to the the baby face and the heel and everything. So, but did you know he was going to be that big? Of course not. No. But viable heel manager, and did I think Vince McMahon would be a great heel manager? Yeah, absolutely. But as big as he was, no, not at all.
Dave, what can you tell us about the Butterbean experiment with the Brawl for All?
The brawl for all was one of the most ill-conceived, terrible ideas that they ever had because so many guys got hurt. That was the problem, and nobody got over. They were in a war with WCW. UFC was, it was past its peak, but 2 years earlier, UFC had been really hot. So there was this idea of reality, and it's just like, let's actually do real matches on our wrestling show. But they decide to, the boring stuff in UFC is the groundwork, so we'll have them stand. We'll allow takedowns so it's not boxing. But we're not going to allow kicks because we don't want anyone to get kicked in the head. So they came up with this boxing plus takedowns game, which they called Brawl for All. And they had no idea what they were getting into. And they had, I think that there was this mentality that Steve Williams was going to win because, and maybe if he hadn't torn his hamstring, he would have won. But he did. But I don't think they understood all the injuries and the fact that, Steve Williams was certainly a great amateur wrestler, but he hadn't done it in 16 years. I think it was, 82 to 98. And you lose your wrestling if you don't do your wrestling. That's just the reality of it. He wasn't in shooter shape. I don't think they really understood the conditioning. And, Steve Williams had been in bar fights and knocked people out, but when you have these giant gloves and you're not a skilled boxer, you kind of look foolish. And all the guys, I thought that it was Hawk got exposed because you all remember how everybody thought of the Road Warriors and Hawk, right? And then you see him in this thing and he's turning his head on punches and closing his eyes, and it's just like, this is Hawk, you know what I mean? And Doc wasn't what people would have expected him to be because he wasn't a boxer either. And so you have Bart Gunn winning, who nobody, I think he'd done some tough man contests, and there were some people who actually thought he would do pretty well, but they didn't expect him to win. And so now you have a guy who won who's not really all that charismatic, and they completely dropped the ball on him. I don't know why. Then they came up with this idea. The Butterbean thing, as it was presented to me at the time, okay, there are all of these different theories, including the Jim Ross wanted him destroyed theory for knocking out Doc, and I don't buy it. All I can tell you is at the time this thing was going on, the way it was presented to me was that we all know Butterbean's a fake boxer, in the sense of, he would beat up on mechanics and stuff. And I think that they thought that Bart was a hell of an athlete and Butterbean was a gimmick. and that we could train this hell of an athlete who's got a knockout punch, who's a big, tough guy, who's a better athlete than Butterbean, and we'll get this guy some boxing training. Remember, they took him off the road for months, and they had him go with boxing trainers, and we're gonna turn him into a real boxer. He's gonna go in there with Butterbean, and it's gonna put wrestling over, because we're gonna have a wrestler beat up this pay-per-view guy in boxing who everybody in boxing knew was a joke, but they never put him against anybody. So it was like this. That is how it was presented to me. And of course, what happened was completely different. What happened was that he got hit in the head by Butterbean, and he wasn't a real boxer, and he couldn't learn boxing in 2 months. And even though he, may have been a better athlete than Butterbean and bigger and all those things and more reach and all that, the reality is that you can't make up. The guy had trained as a boxer, and he was a boxer for years, and he couldn't match that experience, and he got destroyed, and it was quite the embarrassing moment for WWE. I mean, the idea that they were looking for Butterbean to destroy their guy at WrestleMania, no way. You don't make a wrestler look so bad on your own biggest show of the year if you think that's going to happen. They were not expecting that part. They were expecting him to win. Now, when he didn't win, that was it for Bart Gunn. He ended up in All Japan Pro Wrestling, and that was the end of him in WWE.
There it is, the one and only shoot match in WrestleMania history here at WrestleMania 15.
And I'm pretty sure there will never be another one. And I will guarantee, as long as Vince McMahon and Triple H are alive, there will never be another Brawl for All. Maybe in 100 years, when someone forgets the lessons of this one, they may try it again. if UFC's hot again or something. But right now, I think that they all have it in their heads of what happens when you put workers in a shoot. It serves no purpose.
Now, at this point in 1999, the WWF had also just brought in the month before Paul White, a.k.a. The Big Show, a.k.a. The Giant in WCW. And Dave, it strikes me that Paul White is cut from the precise cloth that would have had Vince McMahon and a lather in the 80s. But he comes into the WWF here in 99, and it takes him an awful long time to get going as a top hand in the deck. And in fact, I'm not sure he ever quite lived up to the expectations of how well he would do.
No, he didn't. He didn't. Although he's had, whatever it is, 15-year run.
Sure. A respectable run, longevity, but what was missing? Had the business changed?
And in many ways, I think he's turned into a much better performer than I ever thought he would be. I mean, he's a good promo. He knows how to play his character, but he's a high mid-card guy. Mm-hmm. He's not a game changer.
Had the business changed such that a guy of his size just didn't have the impact in 99?
I think that the problem, I think what changed the business was the idea, and I think that Vince's father got it, and Vince got it too. I got to say this, because when Paul White was in WCW, I mean, this was a period where I was talking to Vince, and we talked about Paul White. I remember two distinct conversations, that were pretty, I mean, not like hour, but 15, 20 minutes, where we were both going on how we would book Paul White, and we were in complete agreement on what to do. And Vince, and it wasn't this novel thing. It was Vince going like, this is what my dad did with Andre. And I'm just copying every single thing he said. And I'm going, yeah, I worked with Andre. He was a big attraction for, whatever it was, 13, 14 years. And maybe it would have been longer if his health hadn't deteriorated. And that's how you do it. You don't, you bring him into a city once a year. You don't put him on TV too much, once or twice a year. And especially with going national, you don't, you know what I mean? He can do the house show run, but not hit the markets many times. The problem was that they couldn't farm him out to Japan because they didn't have the relationship there. They couldn't farm him out to Mexico. They couldn't farm him out to Europe and New Zealand and Australia and all these places because WWE was an entity of itself. So he had to be around. And then they made this idea that with Raw in the ratings war that every top guy had to be on TV every single week, and that was a killer to him. He did not flourish in that environment. So I think that that's what did it. Now, could he have been as big as Andre? Otherwise, maybe no. Maybe no. Maybe it was a different era. Maybe Andre was a little bit more freakish in different ways. I think that as I recall, one of his first big match was he got hit with a chair and pinned by Stone Cold, and I was absolutely stunned. Even though Stone Cold was the top guy and he was slaying a monster, and I got that part of it, but I was just like, I wasn't expecting Big Show, or Paul White or whatever his name was on that day. I wasn't expecting Paul the Giant White to lose in WWE for years. Maybe Austin in 5 years, sure. But first big match in the company. And I think that once he lost that first big match, he could never be Andre. So as for why Vince did that, I mean, you'd have to ask Vince. I never really understood it.
And WrestleMania 15 is also taking place in the middle of, the fever pitch of shock television, kind of Jerry Springer-esque twists and turns on Raw every week, and just, over-the-top angles and storylines and characters and things that were very risque. But it went to a very dark place here at WrestleMania 15, Dave, because Ray Traylor ends up hanging from the top of the cell by his neck. And they thought this was awesome. It was Undertaker versus Big Boss Man. They thought this would be
that match sucked too.
Oh, horrible match. And then we get that conclusion. I mean, of all the things WWE's done, and they took a ton of heat for the, putting up Stone Cold on a crucifix in 1999 on Raw as well, Undertaker sort of crucifying him. But what was your feeling, and was there a real response from people saying it was inappropriate to have, Big Boss Man hanging from the cell here at WrestleMania 15?
Yeah, I mean, there was negativity, but I don't remember it being like, like the kind of negativity that I remember when they continued the show after Owen Hart died. That was 15 times bigger.
Sure.
But yeah, yeah. I mean, it was. I mean, I think that I remember it was just like the whole presentation of that match was terrible because it was, most of the Hell in a Cell matches have been really, really good, and that one wasn't. And and again, I think that on paper, a lot of people expected a good match and just didn't materialize.
And around the same time as this show, and in regards to this match too, the higher power storyline started between the Ministry of Darkness and the corporation. And my question is, do you know, was Vince always intended to be revealed as the quote-unquote higher power?
Yeah, as far as I know. I've never heard different, but if people say different, then then they might be right, but I don't remember. I was expecting it to be Vince. I was horribly disappointed when it was Vince.
There was all kinds of speculation on the Monday of that show. It could be anybody under the sun. I remember the names were coming up.
Yeah. But yeah, I thought it was a terribly flat ending to that story.
And that was one of several, really creative pieces of business that the WWF did to overtake WCW in the ratings war. And my final question on WrestleMania 15, Dave, is the fact that we're here in 1999 and is the first year where WCW does not beat the WWF in the 12-month calendar year in the ratings. They had a show in October of 98 where they replayed the Goldberg, Diamond Dallas Page Halloween Havoc match, which went off the air before the pay-per-view cutoff time, and I think that was the last Nitro to beat Raw. So we're here in 99, and Raw is, definitely lapping WCW. So
they're killing them. 1999 was the collapse of WCW because even though WWF went ahead in 98. WCW, even at the end of 98, it was incredibly strong. I mean, it was funny because you knew that they were self-destructing, before the end of 98, but they still did those 3 stadium shows that did like 30,000 people, the TWA Dome, the Astrodome, and the Georgia Dome, in like December and to January 4th. And Bill Goldberg was on fire until they beat him. So it was 2 juggernauts going against each other, and WWF was ahead, but WCW was making money. Bill Goldberg was on, like I said, was hot. They had the Hogan Goldberg match that year. There was, Eric was losing it because he was losing the battle, and I think that he was having a hard time with that. But but then in '99, they creatively went to hell and they killed their company. '99 was the year they killed the company. 2000 was the year they lost all their money.